A man can survive without power longer than he can survive without hope. But when even food loses its meaning, something inside him has already begun to disappear. That was the quiet truth hidden behind the towering gates of Nathan Cole's estate, though no newspaper ever printed it, and no rival family ever dared to whisper it aloud. Across Chicago, Nathan Cole's name carried weight that could silence entire rooms. Business owners lowered their voices when they heard he was coming. Politicians smiled a little wider when he extended a hand. Security guards straightened their backs before he even stepped through a doorway. To the outside world, he was the man who controlled every negotiation before it began. But inside his own mansion, there was one battle he had been losing for nearly 6 weeks. Every breakfast returned untouched. Every lunch disappeared back into the kitchen exactly as it had left. Every carefully prepared dinner cooled beneath polished silver covers before being thrown away. The estate employed award-winning chefs who had cooked for celebrities, governors, and billionaire executives. Yet none of them could persuade Nathan to eat more than a single bite. At first they believed he was simply exhausted. Then they redesigned every menu. Imported Japanese wagyu, fresh Maine lobster, hand-cut pasta, prime dry-aged steaks, organic vegetables flown in before sunrise. Nothing mattered. Each tray returned almost exactly as it had left. Soon the mansion changed in ways no visitor could see. Conversations in the kitchen became whispers. Every footstep echoed with nervous caution. Staff members checked one another's expressions before speaking, wondering whether today would finally be the day someone lost their job because another untouched meal came back downstairs. The executive chef stopped sleeping through the night. Mrs. Reynolds, the longtime housekeeper, quietly replaced untouched flowers with fresh ones every morning because even the dining room seemed to have forgotten how to welcome life. Nathan himself offered no explanation. He wasn't angry. He wasn't demanding. Somehow that made everything worse. He simply looked at each meal with calm, distant eyes before sliding the plate away, as if food belonged to another lifetime he could no longer remember. Doctors visited. Nutrition specialists arrived carrying charts and recommendations. Therapists scheduled private appointments. Every report ended the same way. His body remained healthy enough. His mind remained sharp enough. Yet something invisible stood between him and every meal placed before him. No medicine reached it. No diagnosis could name it. Then, on a cool Monday morning in early October, while maple leaves drifted across the long stone driveway, a young woman stepped through the service entrance carrying nothing except a small canvas bag and a neatly folded employment letter. Naomi Carter had been hired as the estate's newest maid after another employee retired. She was 27 years old, soft-spoken, and almost invisible among the experienced household staff who had served the Cole family for years. She greeted everyone with a warm smile, thanked the maintenance crew for holding the door, and quietly memorized every hallway before beginning her first shift. She had no idea that everyone inside the mansion measured time by untouched plates instead of clocks. She had no intention of changing anyone's life. She simply wanted to do honest work well enough to earn her paycheck. But before the sun disappeared beyond the tall windows that evening, the meal no one else could save would be placed before the one man who had forgotten what hunger felt like, and nothing inside Nathan Cole's mansion would ever be the same again. Naomi spent her first morning doing the smallest jobs no one else noticed. She polished brass railings until they reflected the autumn sunlight, arranged fresh towels in guest suites that had not been occupied for months, and quietly learned which floorboards creaked beneath her shoes. She listened more than she spoke, noticing that every employee carried the same careful expression, as though the mansion itself expected disappointment before each new day had even begun. During her lunch break, she sat alone near the back garden with a simple turkey sandwich she had packed from home. Before she could finish half of it, she noticed an elderly groundskeeper struggling to lift a heavy crate of flower bulbs. Without hesitation, she placed her lunch aside and walked over with a warm smile. Together they carried the box across the garden path. The older man thanked her with genuine surprise. "Most new people spend their first week trying not to get noticed," he said. Naomi simply smiled. "My grandmother always told me that helping someone usually makes the work feel lighter." Those words stayed with him long after she returned inside. Later that afternoon, Naomi entered the kitchen to collect fresh linens and found an atmosphere unlike anything she had ever experienced. The executive chef stared silently at another untouched dinner tray that had just returned from the dining room. No one spoke. One assistant quietly scraped untouched vegetables into the trash, while another wrapped an untouched steak that had never even been cut. Naomi looked at the plate with confusion before asking softly, "Did something happen to the meal?" The room became so quiet that even the humming refrigerators seemed louder. Finally, Mrs. Reynolds answered in a calm voice. "Nothing happened to the meal. It simply was not eaten." Naomi looked around the enormous kitchen, noticing expensive ingredients stacked neatly on stainless steel counters. Fresh herbs, homemade bread, beautiful produce, perfectly prepared food headed for the trash. "Does this happen often?" she asked. Mrs. Reynolds sighed. "Every day." No one offered another explanation. Everyone simply returned to work. As Naomi folded clean towels beside the pantry later that evening, she noticed a small basket filled with vegetables that were still perfectly fresh but had been set aside because they were slightly misshapen. A few carrots, onions, celery, and fresh parsley rested beside a package of chicken that had not been used for the day's menu. She paused for a moment, remembering cold evenings in her grandmother's tiny house where money had been scarce, but dinner always carried warmth. Her grandmother had often said that comfort never came from expensive ingredients. It came from remembering who would be sitting at the table. Naomi looked toward the silent kitchen where everyone hurried through another anxious evening. She knew she was only a maid. No one had hired her to cook. No one expected her to touch the stove. Still, something inside her could not ignore the untouched food disappearing into the garbage day after day. She quietly approached Mrs. Reynolds before clocking out. "May I ask one favor?" The housekeeper looked up with polite curiosity. Naomi hesitated for only a second. "If those ingredients are only going to be thrown away tomorrow, would you mind if I made something simple after everyone finishes cleaning? Just one pot. Nothing fancy." Mrs. Reynolds studied the young woman carefully. It was an unusual request. It was probably against protocol. Yet there was something sincere in Naomi's eyes that reminded her of a kindness she had not seen inside the mansion for a very long time. After a thoughtful pause, she nodded once. "Very well, but only after the kitchen closes." Naomi smiled with quiet gratitude, unaware that a single homemade recipe carried only in memory was about to reach a place no expert chef, no physician, and no expensive treatment had managed to touch. Long after the kitchen staff had gone home, only a handful of lights remained glowing beneath the polished copper fixtures. Naomi quietly tied on a plain apron she found hanging near the pantry and gathered the ingredients Mrs. Reynolds had allowed her to use. There was nothing expensive about the meal she planned to make. A whole chicken slowly simmered with onions, carrots, celery, garlic, fresh parsley, black pepper, and a pinch of thyme. She stirred the pot patiently, letting the rich aroma fill the empty kitchen. Then she baked soft buttermilk biscuits from a recipe she had memorized years earlier while standing beside her grandmother in a tiny apartment where every meal had been made with gratitude instead of luxury. Mrs. Reynolds returned to finish paperwork and stopped outside the kitchen doorway. She watched Naomi humming quietly as steam rose gently into the warm light above the stove. There was no rush in her movements, no performance, no attempt to impress anyone. She cooked as though she were preparing dinner for someone she deeply cared about. "That smells different," Mrs. Reynolds finally admitted. Naomi smiled without looking up. "My grandmother always said soup should never hurry. If it does, people only taste the ingredients. If it takes its time, they taste the care." Mrs. Reynolds said nothing, but those words lingered in the silent room. Nearly an hour later, the soup was finished. Naomi poured it into a simple white bowl, placed one warm biscuit beside it, and gently wiped the edge clean with a folded towel. Compared with the elaborate meals usually carried upstairs, it almost looked too plain. Mrs. Reynolds hesitated before lifting the tray. "If he refuses it, do not take it personally," she warned softly. Naomi nodded. "It is only soup." Together they walked through the quiet hallways toward Nathan's private dining room. Inside, Nathan sat alone near the fireplace with several business documents spread neatly across the table. He barely glanced up as Mrs. Reynolds entered. "Dinner, sir." His expression remained distant. "Leave it there." She placed the tray before him and quietly stepped back. Naomi remained outside the partially opened door, never intending to watch, but unable to leave. Nathan reached for the spoon almost automatically, as though preparing to reject another meal without thinking. Then something unexpected happened. Before taking the first bite, he paused. His eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned closer to the bowl, breathing in the gentle aroma rising with the steam. For several long seconds, he did nothing at all. Mrs. Reynolds felt her heartbeat quicken. Nathan slowly lifted one spoonful and tasted it. The room became impossibly still. He did not push the bowl away. Instead, he lowered the spoon carefully, closed his eyes for only a moment, and drew another quiet breath. When he opened them again, the distant emptiness that had lived there for weeks seemed to soften almost imperceptibly. Without speaking a single word, he took another spoonful. Then another. Mrs. Reynolds stood frozen. She had not seen him willingly continue a meal in over a month. Nathan eventually reached for the warm biscuit, broke off a small piece, dipped it into the soup, and continued eating in complete silence. Outside the doorway, Naomi quietly lowered her eyes and began walking away before anyone noticed she had remained nearby. She never saw Nathan finish every last spoonful. She never heard the question he asked after setting the empty bowl aside. His voice was calm, almost cautious, carrying none of the cold authority everyone expected. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said softly, still looking at the empty bowl before him. "Who made this?" Mrs. Reynolds answered honestly because she had learned long ago that Nathan Cole noticed even the smallest hesitation. "It was Naomi Carter, sir, the new maid." Nathan remained silent for several seconds, his eyes still resting on the empty bowl. Finally, he nodded once. "Tell her thank you." Those three simple words traveled through the mansion faster than any official announcement. By sunrise the following morning, every employee had heard the same unbelievable story. The boss had finished an entire meal. More astonishing still, he had asked who prepared it. The kitchen staff celebrated quietly, relieved that another untouched tray had not returned upstairs. The executive chef, however, found himself unable to understand what had happened. He had devoted decades to mastering French techniques, premium ingredients, and elegant presentation, only to watch a simple homemade soup succeed where every carefully designed menu had failed. Although he remained outwardly professional, disappointment settled heavily across his face. Naomi arrived for work without realizing she had become the center of every whispered conversation. She greeted everyone exactly as she had the day before, carrying fresh linens and offering cheerful smiles to people who now looked at her with curiosity instead of indifference. Mrs. Reynolds soon approached her near the laundry room. "Mr. Cole asked me to thank you," she said quietly. Naomi blinked with surprise. "For the soup?" Mrs. Reynolds nodded. "He finished every bite." Naomi lowered her eyes, almost embarrassed by the attention. "I'm glad he enjoyed it." There was no pride in her voice, only genuine relief that someone had finally eaten a warm meal. Later that afternoon, Nathan walked through the mansion for the first time in weeks instead of remaining inside his office. Employees politely stepped aside as he passed, but several noticed something unusual. His posture seemed lighter. The heavy exhaustion that had followed him through every hallway had softened, if only slightly. When he reached the library, he paused beside a large window overlooking the gardens below. There he noticed Naomi helping the elderly groundskeeper plant autumn flowers that had arrived that morning. She laughed softly after accidentally brushing dirt onto her own sleeve, then continued arranging the flower beds with the same patience she had shown in the kitchen. She had no idea anyone was watching. Nathan remained at the window for a quiet moment before continuing on his way without saying a word. That evening, another elaborate dinner prepared by the executive chef waited in the dining room. Nathan looked at it politely before asking a question no one expected. "Is there any of yesterday's soup left?" Mrs. Reynolds smiled apologetically. "No, sir." Nathan thought for a moment. Would it be possible for Miss Carter to prepare it again tomorrow evening if it does not interfere with her regular duties? Mrs. Reynolds could hardly hide her surprise. "I believe she would be honored." Nathan simply nodded. "Only if she wishes to. Do not make it an obligation." Those words revealed something unusual about him. He was not demanding another meal. He was respecting the person who had prepared the first one. Meanwhile, Naomi remained completely unaware of the quiet changes taking place around her. She spent the rest of her afternoon helping another maid organize storage closets and comforting a young dishwasher who feared he had made too many mistakes during his first week. "Everyone starts somewhere," she told him gently. "Do your best today, and tomorrow will feel easier." Mrs. Reynolds overheard those words from the hallway and smiled to herself. She was beginning to realize that perhaps it had never been only the soup. Perhaps the warmth Nathan had tasted came from the same quiet kindness Naomi carried into every room she entered, whether anyone noticed it or not. Over the next several days, an unexpected rhythm settled over the estate. Nathan did not request extravagant dinners or complicated recipes. Instead, every evening, after Naomi had completed her regular duties, she quietly prepared another simple homemade meal using ordinary ingredients already stocked in the kitchen. Sometimes it was chicken noodle soup. Other nights, it was slow-cooked beef stew with fresh vegetables, creamy mashed potatoes, or baked chicken with roasted carrots and homemade rolls. None of the meals looked worthy of a luxury magazine, yet every plate returned completely empty. The staff noticed the change long before anyone spoke about it. Nathan began arriving downstairs earlier each morning. He no longer skipped breakfast, even if he ate only oatmeal with fresh fruit and toast. His morning meetings became calmer. The sharp fatigue that had once surrounded him like a heavy winter coat gradually disappeared. Employees who had spent months avoiding eye contact now found themselves greeted with a quiet nod as he walked through the halls. The mansion itself seemed to breathe again. Fresh flowers remained on the dining table instead of being replaced beside untouched meals. The kitchen no longer prepared 3 different backup menus every evening. Even laughter slowly returned during afternoon breaks. Yet not everyone welcomed the change. Executive Chef Victor Lang had dedicated more than 25 years to building a reputation that earned respect throughout Chicago. He had cooked state dinners, charity galas, and private celebrations for some of the wealthiest families in America. Now, despite every professional accomplishment, the meal Nathan looked forward to each evening came from someone who had never attended culinary school. Victor never spoke unkindly to Naomi, but each compliment Nathan offered about dinner quietly bruised his pride. Across the hallway, another pair of observant eyes watched everything with growing concern. Evelyn Brooks, Nathan's longtime social companion and frequent guest at the estate, had grown accustomed to being the person whose opinions mattered most during private dinners and charity events. She had expected their relationship to continue naturally toward a future together. Instead, she noticed something she could not explain. Nathan smiled more often after simple dinners prepared by a quiet maid than he had during any elegant evening she had arranged over the past year. It was not romance she feared. It was influence. One afternoon she arrived carrying a beautifully wrapped gift basket filled with imported chocolates and expensive tea. She expected Nathan to join her for coffee in the sunroom, but Mrs. Reynolds politely explained that he had postponed their meeting because he wanted to review community scholarship applications before dinner. As Evelyn walked through the hallway toward the front entrance, she passed the kitchen just as Naomi carried a fresh loaf of bread from the oven. The rich aroma filled the air. Naomi noticed Evelyn immediately and smiled warmly. "Good afternoon. Would you like a slice while it is still warm?" Evelyn forced a polite smile, but declined. As she continued walking, she glanced back through the doorway. Nathan had quietly entered the kitchen without anyone announcing him. He thanked Naomi for preparing dinner, picked up a small piece of freshly baked bread, and smiled for the first time in weeks before taking a bite. It was a simple moment, innocent and ordinary, yet Evelyn felt an uncomfortable knot tighten inside her chest. She had spent months trying to bring light back into Nathan's life through expensive vacations, exclusive restaurants, and carefully planned evenings. Somehow, a young maid with flour on her apron had accomplished more with kindness than luxury ever could. That evening, after the estate had settled into silence, Victor and Evelyn crossed paths near the wine cellar. Neither intended to begin a conspiracy, yet both carried the same quiet question. How had everything inside Nathan Cole's world changed so completely because of one person who had arrived with nothing more than humility, compassion, and a family recipe remembered by heart? The following evening arrived with the same peaceful routine that had quietly transformed the estate over the past several days. Naomi prepared a hearty vegetable soup with roasted chicken, fresh herbs, and warm homemade bread, while humming the same gentle melody her grandmother had once sung in a tiny kitchen many years before. Mrs. Reynolds carried the tray upstairs exactly as she always did, and Nathan welcomed it with a grateful smile that no one in the mansion would have believed possible only a month earlier. He finished nearly every spoonful before setting the spoon beside the bowl and reaching for a glass of water. Then, for the first time since his appetite had returned, he paused. His expression changed only slightly, but Mrs. Reynolds noticed immediately. "Are you feeling all right, sir?" she asked with quiet concern. Nathan placed one hand against the edge of the table and answered honestly, "I think I simply need to rest." There was no panic in his voice, only unexpected fatigue. Mrs. Reynolds immediately contacted the family physician, who happened to be finishing appointments only a few miles away. Within 30 minutes, the doctor had arrived, examined Nathan carefully, and reassured everyone that there was no immediate emergency. "His blood pressure is slightly lower than usual," the physician explained. "He has been recovering from weeks of poor nutrition, and his body is still adjusting to eating regular meals again. I recommend a full night of rest and additional tests tomorrow morning just to be safe." The explanation should have calmed the household, but rumors often moved faster than facts inside large estates. Before midnight, anxious whispers had already spread through the staff. Someone claimed Nathan had become seriously ill after dinner. Someone else quietly suggested that the sudden change must have been connected to the meals Naomi had been preparing. By sunrise, uncertainty had replaced confidence. Victor Lang stood silently inside the kitchen, watching employees exchange nervous glances instead of preparing breakfast. He did not accuse Naomi directly, yet his carefully chosen questions planted quiet doubt. "Has anyone verified every ingredient that has been used recently?" he asked. "Perhaps we should be more cautious until the doctor finishes his evaluation." No one challenged the suggestion because everyone wanted to protect Nathan. Naomi arrived a few minutes later and immediately sensed that something felt different. Friendly smiles had become hesitant nods. Conversations stopped whenever she entered a room. Even the young dishwasher she had encouraged only days earlier struggled to meet her eyes. Confused, she approached Mrs. Reynolds, who gently explained that Nathan had become unwell after dinner but was resting comfortably under medical supervision. Naomi's face filled with genuine concern. "May I prepare something lighter for him today?" she asked softly. "Perhaps a simple broth?" Mrs. Reynolds appreciated the kindness, but hesitated. "Let us wait until the doctor finishes the examination." Naomi nodded without complaint. She understood completely. Even so, the distance growing between her and the rest of the staff weighed heavily on her heart. By afternoon, laboratory samples had been collected, and the physician assured everyone once again that Nathan's condition remained stable and that there was no sign of poisoning or any dangerous illness. Nevertheless, uncertainty continued feeding suspicion. Evelyn arrived unexpectedly with flowers and found the household unusually tense. She quietly observed the worried expressions, listened to fragments of conversation, and realized that doubt had begun to settle around the one person Nathan trusted most. She said very little, yet she did nothing to stop the speculation either. As evening approached, Nathan remained upstairs resting peacefully, unaware that downstairs the atmosphere had shifted once again. Naomi quietly folded fresh linens beside the kitchen doorway, wondering if she had somehow made a mistake despite following the same careful recipe she always had. She did not defend herself because there was nothing to defend. She simply hoped Nathan would recover quickly. But while she continued serving others with the same quiet humility that had changed the mansion only days before, invisible seeds of suspicion were already taking root in hearts that had allowed jealousy to speak louder than truth. Nathan opened his eyes just after sunrise to the soft glow of autumn light stretching across the windows of his bedroom. He felt tired but clear-minded, and after speaking with the physician for several minutes, he received reassuring news. Every test had come back normal. His brief weakness had most likely been caused by the strain of returning to regular meals after weeks of barely eating combined with long hours of work and too little rest. The doctor smiled warmly before gathering his medical bag. "You are recovering well, Nathan. Your body is simply reminding you that healing takes time. Eat, sleep, and allow yourself to recover at the same pace you would expect from anyone else." Nathan thanked him sincerely. As soon as the physician left, his first question surprised everyone standing nearby. "Where is Naomi?" Mrs. Reynolds answered carefully. "She is downstairs, sir." Nathan immediately noticed the hesitation in her voice. What happened? Mrs. Reynolds lowered her eyes for a brief moment before explaining how uncertainty had quietly spread through the household after his sudden fatigue. She admitted that no one had formally accused Naomi of anything, but many employees had begun wondering whether her meals had somehow caused his condition despite the doctor's reassurance. Nathan remained silent while listening, yet the disappointment in his expression was impossible to miss. He rose from his chair and slowly walked downstairs without asking anyone to announce his arrival. As he entered the kitchen, conversation stopped almost instantly. Every employee turned toward him. Victor stood beside the preparation table while Naomi quietly arranged fresh vegetables near the sink, unaware that Nathan had entered the room. She looked up only after sensing the silence around her. The moment she saw him standing there, relief appeared across her face. "I am so glad you are feeling better," she said with genuine warmth. "I was worried about you." Nathan studied her expression carefully. There was no fear, no defensiveness, no attempt to explain herself before being questioned. She looked only relieved that he had recovered. He turned toward the rest of the kitchen staff. "The doctor confirmed there is nothing wrong with the food," he said calmly. "No one here is responsible for yesterday." His voice was not loud, but every word settled over the room with quiet authority. Then he looked back at Naomi. "Thank you for your kindness." Naomi smiled gently. "You do not have to thank me, sir. I only wanted you to have a warm meal." Nathan nodded thoughtfully before noticing the untouched bowl of fresh broth sitting on the counter. "Was that prepared for today?" Naomi hesitated. "Only if you wanted something light while you recovered." Nathan picked up the bowl himself without waiting for anyone else to serve him. He tasted one spoonful, then smiled faintly. "Exactly what I needed." Around the kitchen, shoulders slowly relaxed. The young dishwasher who had avoided Naomi's eyes the day before quietly apologized for believing the rumors. Naomi simply smiled and accepted his apology without making him feel ashamed. Mrs. Reynolds watched the exchange with quiet pride, while Victor remained thoughtful, realizing that genuine respect could not be earned through titles alone. Yet Nathan's sharp instincts had already begun noticing something else. The rumors had spread far too quickly for simple misunderstanding. Someone had encouraged uncertainty before the doctor had even finished his examination. As he finished the last spoonful of broth, he looked toward the security office visible through the hallway and made a silent decision. He would review the estate's camera recordings from the previous evening, not because he suspected Naomi, but because experience had taught him that whenever fear spread faster than truth, someone usually benefited from the confusion. That afternoon, Nathan asked Mrs. Reynolds to gather every senior employee in the library before sunset. No one knew the reason for the meeting, and quiet speculation once again drifted through the mansion. Naomi continued her regular duties without asking questions. She dusted the bookshelves, refreshed the flowers in the front hallway, and helped prepare tea for the meeting, never imagining that the discussion would soon revolve around her. At exactly 6 o'clock, the library doors closed. The room was filled with familiar faces. Mrs. Reynolds stood near the fireplace. Victor Lang occupied one side of the long conference table. Evelyn Brooks sat calmly beside the windows, her expression carefully composed. Naomi remained near the back of the room, believing she had only been asked to serve refreshments. Nathan entered a moment later carrying a slim folder. His expression was calm, but every eye followed him as he took his seat. "Before we discuss anything else," he began, "I would like to thank everyone for your concern during yesterday's health scare. The physician has confirmed that I am completely fine." A wave of relief quietly moved across the room. Nathan allowed the silence to settle before continuing. "However, I have discovered something more troubling than my brief illness." He pressed a small remote resting on the table. A large monitor mounted above the fireplace displayed security footage from the previous evening. The recording showed the kitchen exactly as everyone remembered it. Naomi carefully prepared dinner. Mrs. Reynolds inspected the tray before carrying it upstairs. Nothing unusual appeared. Nathan advanced the recording several minutes. After Mrs. Reynolds left, the video revealed another scene few people had noticed. Two employees entered the kitchen believing no one else was watching. One quietly remarked that perhaps the new maid had finally made a mistake. The other answered that if enough people repeated the same concern, everyone would eventually believe it, whether it was true or not. Neither person touched the food. Neither attempted to harm anyone. They simply encouraged suspicion before any facts existed. Nathan stopped the recording. The room became perfectly still. The employees lowered their heads, immediately realizing the weight of their careless words. Nathan spoke without raising his voice. Rumors can damage a person's dignity long before the truth has a chance to arrive. No one interrupted him. He looked toward Naomi. While many people questioned your character, you never defended yourself. What? Naomi answered with the same quiet sincerity she had carried since her first day. Because I knew the truth would not change simply because people were afraid. I only hoped you would recover. Her words settled gently over the room. Mrs. Reynolds blinked away unexpected tears. Even Victor lowered his eyes, recognizing that his own silence had allowed doubt to grow instead of stopping it. After a long pause, he stood and faced Naomi. I owe you an apology, he admitted honestly. I allowed my pride to become more important than fairness. That was my mistake. Naomi smiled kindly. Thank you. We all worry when someone we care about becomes sick. Her answer carried no bitterness, only grace. Nathan slowly rose from his chair. Respect is measured by how we treat people when they have no power to defend themselves. Miss Carter demonstrated that lesson better than anyone in this room. He turned toward Mrs. Reynolds with a quiet smile. Beginning tomorrow, Naomi will continue her regular position exactly as she requested. But whenever she chooses to cook, the kitchen will gladly support her. Around the library, expressions softened one by one. The tension that had shadowed the estate for days quietly disappeared, replaced by something that had been missing long before Naomi first walked through the front gate. It was not admiration for a recipe. It was renewed respect for the simple courage of a humble heart that had answered suspicion with kindness instead of resentment. The weeks that followed felt different in ways no architect could have designed and no amount of money could have purchased. The estate still stood behind its iron gates. The polished marble floors still reflected the morning light, and Nathan Cole still carried the quiet confidence that had earned him respect throughout Chicago. Yet the atmosphere inside those walls had changed completely. Breakfast was no longer a silent ritual of untouched plates and worried glances. Employees greeted one another with relaxed smiles. Conversations returned to the kitchen, and laughter occasionally echoed through the hallways without anyone fearing they had spoken too loudly. Nathan kept his promise exactly as he had made it. Naomi remained a maid because that was the position she had accepted, and he respected her wish to continue serving in the role she loved. She still organized guest rooms, folded fresh linens, arranged flowers in the front hall, and stopped whenever someone needed an extra pair of hands. Only when she freely chose to cook did she step into the kitchen, where Victor now welcomed her with genuine appreciation instead of quiet resentment. Over time, the two developed an unexpected friendship. Victor even admitted that years of professional training had taught him how to impress people, but Naomi had reminded him how to comfort them. He began adding one simple homemade recipe to every seasonal menu, calling it the Heart Table Special, not because it was expensive, but because it reminded everyone that care could never be measured by price. Evelyn also changed in ways few expected. One afternoon, she quietly found Naomi arranging fresh flowers in the library and apologized for allowing suspicion to cloud her judgment. Naomi accepted the apology with the same grace she had shown everyone else. There was no bitterness to release because she had never carried any. That simple exchange became another quiet turning point inside the mansion. As autumn slowly gave way to winter, Nathan introduced a new tradition. Every Sunday evening, regardless of business schedules or important meetings, the entire household gathered around one long dining table. Executives, housekeepers, gardeners, security officers, chefs, assistants, and maintenance workers all shared the same meal together. There were no reserved seats, no special place for titles, and no separate dining rooms. Nathan insisted that everyone be served at the same time because, in his words, gratitude tasted better when shared. More often than not, the meal was inspired by one of Naomi's family recipes. Chicken soup, beef stew, fresh bread, peach cobbler, or simple baked vegetables filled the room with familiar aromas that reminded everyone of home rather than status. New employees often asked why such ordinary meals had become the estate's favorite tradition. The older staff would simply smile before looking toward Naomi, who usually responded with quiet embarrassment and changed the subject. Nathan never revealed every detail of those difficult weeks when he had forgotten what hunger felt like. He did not need to. Every empty bowl carried its own memory. Every shared meal became a reminder that healing sometimes arrived without announcing itself, wearing an ordinary apron instead of an expensive suit. Years later, visitors continued to admire Nathan Cole's success, his discipline, and his leadership. Few realized that one of the greatest changes in his life had begun with someone the world might easily have overlooked. It was never the recipe alone that restored his appetite. It was the kindness stirred into every meal, the humility served beside every plate, and the quiet dignity of a woman who never asked for recognition while giving others reasons to hope again. And on every Sunday evening, as warm bread was passed from one pair of hands to another around a table where everyone belonged, the estate remembered a truth far more valuable than wealth, because that was the day they all learned that the smallest act of genuine compassion could nourish a heart long before it ever reached an empty stomach. And that day, everyone remembered what dignity truly looks like.